At the conclusion of our previous episode, we mentioned that our next episodes would be focused on Oswald's time spent in New Orleans. However, we feel that certain events that occurred while Oswald was living in Dallas prior to his eventual move to New Orleans should be included within the sphere of Oswald's time spent in Dallas. The outstanding event is without doubt the mysterious backyard photos taken of Lee Oswald in the backyard of his duplex residence located on Neely Street in Dallas. According to the Warren Commission, on March 31, 1963, Lee Harvey Oswald asked his wife Marina to take a picture of him in their backyard while he had a holster containing a revolver just like the one he allegedly used to shoot Officer J.D. Tippit, and he was holding a rifle that looked like the Carcano that was found on the 6th floor of the Texas School Book Depository building. However, it should be noted that the police first found a Mauser rifle behind some boxes on the 6th floor, along with a British Enfield rifle that was found on the roof of the Book Depository building. These other two rifles and all their relevance to the case were scrubbed from any and all reports. But as those who were alive during that time will tell you, Walter Cronkite told the entire nation about these other rifles before they mysteriously disappeared from everyone's radar. Oswald also had two newspapers in the photo, The Militant and The Worker. But how do we know the photograph is legit? There's the existence of the photographs themselves. Yes, there's more than one. Combined with Marina Oswald's Warren Commission testimony where she talks about taking these pictures at the surface level, this seems pretty damning for Oswald. In theory, it shows Oswald about 7 months before the assassination with both guns that he's later accused of possessing and using by the Warren Commission. The backyard photos are a hotly disputed battleground in the world of JFK assassination research. To those who say that Oswald acted alone, the pictures are a smoking gun, proving that he possessed the Kennedy and Tippit murder weapons in March of 1963, and that he was proud enough of those weapons to want to take a picture. The two supposedly communist-friendly newspapers that he's holding up for the camera helped to establish Oswald's radical political leanings. The American public first saw this photo when it was on the cover of Life magazine on February 21, 1964. At that time, the Warren Report had yet to be released, and the public's opinion on the Kennedy assassination was still up in the air. This was also a time when about half of all Americans read Life magazine. Skeptics of the official story counter that someone superimposed Oswald's face over another image to make it look like Oswald was in the photo when it was really someone else's body. This is actually what Oswald himself told the police when they showed him one of the photos. To get to the bottom of this, we'll look at the findings of the HSCA photography panel, Marina Oswald's testimony to the Warren Commission, and the chain of custody of the photos and the camera. So, did Lee Harvey Oswald actually pose for the famous backyard photos, or were the images edited to assist in framing Oswald? Or is there something else going on? When the House Select Committee on Assassinations reopened the case, a panel of photographic experts reviewed various pictures, including the Oswald backyard photos. The panel determined that the photos were initially obtained from a search of the garage of Ruth and Michael Payne on Saturday, November 23rd, the day after the assassination. During the afternoon, the Dallas police found two of these famous backyard photos, which were marked 133A and 133B, as well as a negative for 133B. Those two pictures and one negative were then turned over to the FBI and reviewed by the Warren Commission. But it turns out that there are a few more versions of these backyard photos aside from just the two that were included in the Warren Report. The HSCA looked at a total of 4 additional photos and copies, and 2 of those were prints of a picture that had never been published in the Warren Report. Of these new images, the first was 133CDS, which was provided by the widow of Dallas police officer Roscoe White. Then there was 133A and 133C Stovall, which were provided by Officer Stovall, one of the 5 detectives involved in the search that resulted in finding the 2 images that were actually used by the Warren Commission. The HSCA reviewed another photo marked 133A de Mohrenschildt. This picture was provided by George de Mohrenschildt's widow, Jean. The back of the de Mohrenschildt photo has an inscription that says, "Quote to my friend George from Lee Oswald 5463. The 4 is written as a Roman numeral in darker ink. There's another transcription on the back of the photo that says in Russian cryptic, quote, "Hunter of fascists, ha ha ha." As we will soon see, the political star of General Edwin Walker was on the rise around the same time as the alleged backyard photos. The Warren report concluded that Oswald fired a shot at Walker and attempted to kill him on April 10, 1963. We'll cover the General Walker shooting in depth in an upcoming episode. All you need to know right now is that this reference to Hunter of Fascists on the back of the De Mohrenschildt 133A photo, whether it's fake or real, is probably a reference to General Walker. It was confirmed by HSCA handwriting expert Joseph McNally and two other experts that Oswald did in fact write the "To My Friend George" from Lee Oswald quote. The other phrase, which said "Hunter of Fascists, ha ha ha," was written by neither Lee nor Marina nor George de Mohrenschildt. According to these experts, that phrase was apparently written by one person and then retraced by someone else who was not familiar with Russian acrylic. According to McNally, there were actually 3 different people who wrote on the back of this picture, but aside from Oswald, he couldn't positively identify any of them. So Oswald and 2 other unknown people wrote on the back of this picture, but the other 2 people are not Marina and not George de Mohrenschildt. If the experts are right, who could possibly have written on the photo? And why would they write that if it wasn't Marina or de Mohrenschildt? And while we're on the topic of 133A de Mohrenschildt, where did this mysterious photo come from? At what point exactly does it enter the picture? De Mohrenschildt said that his wife found it in a vinyl record sleeve in his storage unit after they returned from Haiti. He also said that he was in Haiti on April 5, 1963, so the inscription could not have been for that date because he wouldn't have seen Lee at that time. But as author James D. Eugenio points out, de Mohrenschildt wasn't truthful about that. He wasn't in Haiti on April 5th. He didn't actually leave until April 13th or April 14th. Going another level deeper on these questions, exactly how did the vinyl records make their way into D.E. Mohrenschildt's storage unit? It turns out that they were picked up from Everett Glover's house, but Michael Payne is the one who dropped the records off to Glover. D. Mohrenschildt had let Marina borrow a few of his English language records to try to help her learn English. So the vinyl records would have all been at the Payne house. But the reason that this doesn't totally add up is that the Dallas police inventoried and collected several boxes of vinyl records. It's in their written report. Either the police and the FBI didn't see this photo when they took the records into evidence, or the photo was put in the record sleeve after the records had been returned by the investigators, but before they were given to Everett Glover. The HSCA photo panel, relying on scientists from the Rochester Institute of Technology, determined that the one negative they had in evidence, the same one from the Warren Commission, did in fact come from an Imperial reflex camera, which is the kind of camera that Marina eventually said Lee owned. The scientists took test pictures using 2 different Imperial reflex cameras, not the actual camera that's alleged to be the one Marina used. What they found is that with the Imperial reflex, the film is drug across the film plane on the inside of the camera each time a picture is snapped, and that dragging action creates consistent scratches on the pictures. Also, the mold on the camera makes an imperfect edge around the image, and the edges of images taken with the Imperial reflex camera are always blurry. All of these characteristics, the scratches around the edge, the imperfect edge, and the blur away from the center of the image established that the negative for the backyard photos was in fact taken by an Imperial reflex camera. Commission Exhibit 2557 is an 8-page FBI report that lays out how the camera came to be in the FBI's custody. The report says that about 3 weeks after the assassination, Robert Oswald, Lee's brother, went to Ruth Payne's house to pick up some items that she said belonged to Lee. Then, on February 24th, about 10 weeks later, Robert finally gave this camera to the FBI. According to Robert, his brother Lee bought the Imperial reflex camera in 1957 and then left it with Robert in 1959 when Lee went to Russia. Then, in 1962, Lee returned from Russia and picked up the camera from his brother. But when Ruth Payne's home was initially searched on the day of the assassination and the day after, none of the Dallas police officers remembered seeing an Imperial reflex camera among Oswald's possessions, nor did they find any of the 620 film that this type of camera used. There is also mention of a Minox mini spy camera and a light meter that were initially mentioned but failed to make their way into any of the Warren report findings. What happened to the Minox spy camera? It was there, and the Dallas police took photos of it, along with the leather-cased light meter. They did document a Russian Quira 2 camera and a stereo realist camera, but no Imperial reflex camera. Those 4 Dallas detectives, John Adamczyk, Richard Stovall, Gus Rose, and Henry Moore, were shown a photo of the Imperial reflex by the FBI. None of them recalled seeing that particular camera that day, and they all said that if it had been discovered during their search, they would have brought it in. But there was one other officer who searched Ruth Payne's garage that day, Detective John McCabe from the Irving Police Department. According to an FBI report, McCabe is, quote, certain that he saw a light gray box camera in a box in Mrs. Payne's garage. McCabe stated that this camera was in a box which contained books and photographs belonging to Lee Harvey Oswald. McCabe also said that he searched this box, but he didn't take the camera since he didn't consider it to be of any evidentiary value. Detective McCabe told the FBI that the Imperial Reflex camera that he saw was, quote, in a box containing some books, some pictures, and a camera. But it appears that the box that McCabe is referencing was inventoried by the Dallas police. This box shows up in the Stovall D exhibit and is listed as containing 13 books and some random items such as dice and a pencil sharpener, but there's no mention of any camera or photos. So we have 4 Dallas cops who are on the record saying that they looked and they didn't see a box camera like the Imperial Reflex and that they would have remembered it and inventoried it if they did. And then on the other side, we have Irving Detective McCabe, who says that he definitely did see the box camera. This is another one of those fun who should you believe games within the JFK assassination. Critics point to the 4 cops who did the search and didn't find the camera as evidence that it was planted after the fact. And I agree that it's definitely weird that those 4 detectives don't remember seeing that camera. But then we have Detective McCabe right there in the record implying that the other 4 cops must have just been mistaken because he is sure of what he saw, even though the camera is not mentioned in the inventory, and the box he says it was in is included. The premise of the backyard photos being authentic relies on 2 things being true. 1, that Lee Harvey Oswald owned the Imperial Reflex camera, and 2, that Marina Oswald took the backyard photos using the Imperial Reflex camera. Most of the information that we have available to try to answer these questions comes from various statements of Marina Oswald, which means that Marina's credibility as a witness is a big part of the backyard photos story regarding the cameras that the couple owned. Here's the timeline of Marina Oswald's statements. On January 29, 1964, she said that they owned 2 cameras, a Russian Queer A2 and a stereo realist. This testimony was consistent with the cameras that were actually in evidence at the time, since the police did in fact recover an Aquera 2 and a stereo realist. Then 3 weeks later, on February 19th, Marina was shown a photo of the stereo realist camera, one of the 2 in evidence, and for the first time she said that this camera didn't look familiar to her. Then, on February 25th, Marina is shown the Imperial Reflex camera, and she says that camera was the one that belonged to her husband, and it was the one that she used to take the backyard photos. Finally, on August 12th, the stereo realist camera was returned to Ruth Payne, who said that it was hers the whole time. Basically, the evolution of Marina's testimony was that the stereo realist wasn't hers, but the Imperial Reflex, which wasn't in evidence because it was in Robert Oswald's possession, did belong to Lee. Critics question how Marina could maintain for 2.5 months that the family owned the stereo realist camera and then suddenly change her mind. Part of that skepticism on the part of critics comes from the fact that Marina, June, and her infant daughter Rachel all stayed at Robert Oswald's house on February 10th and February 11th of 1964. Those dates are significant because Marina changed her testimony about the cameras on February 19th only after staying with Robert. But maybe this is nothing. Marina also told the Warren Commission that the backyard photos of Lee are, quote, the only time she took any pictures because she said she didn't know how to take pictures. I've heard Warren Report critics say that it's weird that Marina, who had a small child in the house, took only 1 photo during the entirety of her and Lee's marriage, and that was a picture of Lee with guns in the backyard. But that's not evidence. Yes, it's strange, but it doesn't necessarily prove anything. There's also the claim that there were no other photos taken with the Imperial Reflex camera at all, aside from those infamous backyard pictures. But, as it turns out, there are 11 photos, mostly of Marina and her daughter June, that were taken in New Orleans with that same Imperial Reflex camera. Apparently, all of these pictures were taken in one session. Now, the reason that this matters is that it goes against the argument that the Imperial Reflex camera, which took the backyard photos, was used solely for that purpose and is thus suspicious. If the camera was used for more pictures than just Oswald's guns and newspaper's backyard photo, then it's much more believable that Oswald actually owned the camera. So what do we know about who took these other 11 photos on the Imperial Reflex? Marina appears in the photos, so it can't be her. The possibilities are that either it was Oswald himself or it was Ruth Payne. Payne drove to New Orleans and was there with Marina for several days that overlap with the time period when the photos must have been taken. And while official story defenders are quick to argue that Oswald took the photos, a letter from Marina to Ruth Payne seems to prove once and for all that it was Ruth Payne who took the other 11 pictures. The postscript of a letter from Marina to Ruth says, quote, "Have you got the photographs which you took in New Orleans? Therefore, it looks like it was Ruth Payne who took these 11 photos, and she did it while Lee was at work, making it possible that he never even knew the photos existed." Marina told author and former CIA asset Priscilla McMillan that Lee developed the backyard photos himself when McMillan interviewed Marina for her book. But the HSCA photo panel determined that both of the pictures that were found in Ruth Payne's garage and later given to the Warren Commission were developed at a drugstore and not by Lee Harvey Oswald. On the other hand, the de Mohrenschildt photo was developed in a non-commercial setting. This means that Marina is wrong and that Oswald could not have developed 133A and 133B. But Oswald could have developed the photo for de Mohrenschildt and given that one to him. The photo, labeled 133A de Mohrenschildt, was made outside of a commercial photo lab. And remember, it also has writing, which the experts say matches Oswald's. But just because Oswald could have developed this image for de Mohrenschildt doesn't mean that he did. Another reason why critics doubt Marina's testimony that she is the one who took the backyard photos is that she told the HSCA the way to use the Imperial reflex camera was to just put it up to your eye and shoot like any other regular camera. She also said that the camera was black, but in reality, the gray Imperial reflex was a very different style of camera. It required the photographer to hold the camera around their waist and look down into the large rectangular viewfinder as opposed to just looking straight at the subject. It seems like Marina would remember taking those pictures if they were the only ones she ever took in her life, especially because the way the pictures are taken using the Imperial reflex is so counterintuitive. While Marina's testimony was frequently damning of her husband, she wasn't seen as a reliable witness by the Warren Commission because of the numerous inconsistencies in her statements. As I was reading Marina's Warren Commission transcripts, one of the things that jumped out at me was this exchange when she was changing her position about having seen Oswald with a rifle. Marina said, quote, "Yes, I said before I had never seen the rifle before. But I think you understand. I want to help you, and this is why there is no reason for concealing anything. I will not be charged with anything." It sounds like Marina is saying that she'll say whatever they want to hear, so long as she isn't charged with any crimes. If that is what she's saying, then her testimony seems to be coerced and can't be considered to be reliable, but it actually goes further than that. Less than 1 week after the assassination, on November 27, 1963, Marina was interviewed by FBI agents Brown and Hosty at the Six Flags Inn motel where she and her 2 small children were staying. During that interview, FBI agents told Marina that if she cooperated with the government, they would help her to stay in the United States. The FBI report also says, quote, Marina was asked how she intended to make a living for herself and her children. She said she would find some type of work. She was then told that her cooperation with the government could also be of assistance. So the FBI agents asked Marina how she's going to make a living and take care of her kids. And then they quickly add that, quote, the government could also be of assistance. I don't know how to read that anyway, other than the government will pay you money to cooperate. Now, perhaps what they meant was they would help direct her to existing government programs that could potentially help her, but the context here makes it seem like more than that. Now, the definition of cooperation could mean many different things. Still, given the implication and the documents that Marina was promised financial assistance whether she received it or not, and she was promised the opportunity to stay in America, that would have to impact what she said during her testimony. I don't know what Marina's motives were or why she said what she said, but we have to be aware of what will become an ongoing theme in this case. Marina Oswald's testimony is often inconsistent and sometimes flat-out impossible. After Lee Harvey Oswald was arrested, he was interviewed by Captain Fritz at the Dallas jail. Fritz showed Oswald one of the versions of the backyard photos. According to Captain Fritz's declassified notes, he wrote, quote, showed photo of gun, would not discuss. Oswald says I made pictures superimposed, and Oswald also told Fritz, quote, I understand photography very well, and I will prove this is a fake. It's true that Oswald worked at Jagger's Child Stovall, and he had knowledge of photography. So Oswald, more so than the average person, would be aware of photographic forgery techniques. But if you believe that Oswald is guilty, then we can't take Oswald's analysis seriously, since most guilty people will say anything it takes to keep themselves out of jail. While Oswald says the picture of him holding 2 guns in the backyard was faked, the HSCA photo experts concluded that the image was authentic. There were several reasons why the HSCA reached this conclusion. The scratches around the edge of the image, the imperfect edges, and the blur away from the center of the image, all of those things were consistent with the photo coming from the Imperial Reflex camera. And the HSCA photo panel did test CE750, the specific Imperial Reflex camera that was ultimately determined to belong to Oswald. Aside from Oswald's claim that the photos were faked, are there any other reasons to believe that his claim may be true? If you ask Warren Report critics, there are at least 9 independent reasons to doubt the authenticity of the backyard photos. First, the man pictured is wearing black pants and a black polo-style shirt. After thorough searches, neither of those articles of clothing were found among Oswald's belongings. If the shirt and pants were found, it would be a strong argument in support of the photo being authentic, but they weren't found. Sure, Oswald could have thrown these clothes away, but only about 7.5 months passed in between the date when the photos were allegedly taken and in between when Oswald's belongings were searched. If you think that Oswald really did take these pictures, it doesn't make sense that he would have thrown the clothes away to destroy the evidence, because remember, he took the incriminating photos in the first place under that scenario, and that's the act of a zealot, not someone who's worried about avoiding jail time. Second, there's an inconsistency with the rifle sling in the backyard photos as compared to the rifle sling that was found in the school book depository. The leather sling attached to the rifle found in the depository was not the same as the sling in the backyard photos, according to the FBI's own expert Lyndall Schoenfeld, who told the Warren Commission, quote, "I find it to be different from the sling that is presently on the rifle. It has the appearance of being a piece of rope that is tied at both ends, rather than being a leather sling. So that means Oswald would have had to get a new leather rifle sling. And no, it would not have been difficult for him to do that. He could have gone to any gun shop in Dallas and bought a leather rifle sling, just like he could have gone to any gun shop in Dallas and bought a gun instead of the whole mail-order charade that he allegedly ended up doing. Either way, the necessity of Oswald acquiring a different rifle sling is one more thing to consider. Third, many critics say that something doesn't look right with Oswald's chin in the photos. The focus of these claims is typically that the shadow under the chin goes straight down, whereas the shadow of Oswald's body goes to the right. The FBI attempted to recreate the photo with the same lighting at the same time of day, and they did, but they then removed the face of the man from the photo so that you couldn't see where the shadow on the nose went, which made the entire exercise done by the FBI completely pointless. The implication by critics is that Oswald's face was added into another photo and that the shadows don't match. Another discrepancy that's emphasized by skeptics is the shape of the jawbone and chin structure of the person in the photo as compared to other known pictures of Oswald. Recently, there have been researchers like Professor Henry Farid who claim to have recreated the image with shadows that are consistent with the backyard photos. Farid performed detailed tests to confirm how the shadows would fall on human faces using 3D models. In doing that experiment, Farid confirmed that the shadows in the photo are consistent with how they would have been if taken at the same time of day in that same location. In other words, Farid believes that the backyard photos are authentic. However, there's language in the HSCA report that leaves the door open that the image could have been a photographic composite. The HSCA microscopically examined the area above and below the horizontal chin cleft. They were looking to see whether the grains of silver in the photo were consistently distributed. When they did this, they found that there was no difference in the grain structure, but the HSCA report then has this disclaimer quote, "Under very carefully adjusted display conditions, the scanned image of the Oswald backyard negative did exhibit irregular, very fine lines in the chin area. The lines appeared, however, only with the aerospace gradient enhancement process, where the technique was applied at a much higher resolution." The report then goes on to explain that the lines don't necessarily prove forgery because, quote, "similar lines, although less pronounced, were found on a known authentic photograph." Critics of the official story have pointed out that the grain pattern would be consistent and the scratches would also be present if an imperial reflex camera was used to take a picture of an existing photo which had been doctored. This is because the photographic experts examined only one negative and the 133A de Mohrenschildt photo, and their findings of authenticity were simply that: one, the photo came from Oswald's imperial reflex camera, and two, because the grains on the photos were consistent throughout, it was unlikely that there was an image superimposed on the images they examined. But a person skilled in photographic forgery could simply take a photo of another forged photograph with an imperial reflex camera, and the end result would have consistent scratch marks from an imperial reflex and a consistent grain pattern from the same photo. In other words, the metadata on the photo would be consistent with an authentic image, but the substance of the photo itself would not be original, but would be a picture of a picture. The HSCA findings do not rule out that scenario. The fourth potential reason to view the backyard photos with skepticism is the ghost photograph that was found in the Dallas Police Department in 1993. That year, the city manager's office decided to have all of the files cataloged and made available to the public. When reporters Ray and Mary LaFontaine searched these newly released documents, they found a strange picture. It was a pose of the infamous backyard photos of Oswald with the same background, but the figure of the man was cut out, leaving a white space in the shape of a man's silhouette. This image became known as the ghost photograph. In addition to the ghost photograph, the reporters also found a photo of Officer Bobby Brown in a pose very similar to Oswald in the same backyard on Neely Street. According to Brown, he took that picture at the request of the Secret Service a few days after the assassination. Brown told author Gary Savage that he then had his image removed from the photo because he didn't want to be identified with it. He said that he cut his image out of a developed photo and placed a white sheet of paper behind it. In other words, Brown claimed that the ghost photo that was in the Dallas PD archives was a picture of Officer Brown, not a photo of Oswald. But anyone who looks carefully at these images can immediately tell that the cutout does not match the outline of Officer Brown's body. However, the outline is an exact match for Oswald's body in the image labeled 133-C, which is the one pose that the Warren Commission didn't have access to. So, it turns out that it wasn't Officer Brown who was cut out of the photo, it was Oswald. When confronted with this information, Officer Brown changed his story and said that he actually cut the picture out because the FBI wanted to get Oswald's image on a white background. But for what purpose? Brown specifically said that it was him in the photo and that he cut his image out because he didn't want to be associated with it. But then he changed his story to something else when challenged with the reality that the photo was really of Oswald. The fact that there's no police report explaining why these photos exist is concerning, especially after the key witness to the ghost photograph, Officer Brown, was caught in a lie that continues to be unexplained to this day. Reason number 5 to doubt the backyard photos is the two competing stories of exactly how they were found. The FBI wanted to know more about the details of how these backyard photos were found, so they asked Detective John Adamsink and Detective Guy Rose, 2 of the 4 Dallas cops who said they didn't see the Imperial reflex camera, exactly how they found the pictures. Both of them said, quote, from a packet of 47 photographs found in the search. Adamsink told the FBI that he numbered each photo and placed his initials on them. And when we look at the back of these pictures that are relied on by the Warren Commission, they are indeed numbered, and Adamsink's initials appear on the back. So it looks like these backyard photos were found in a packet of 47 other pictures. Just like Adamsink, and Rose says everything seems to be consistent with that story. But Detective Rose told a different story later when he spoke to the Warren Commission. In that testimony, Rose erases Adamsink from the story and says that it was just Detective Rose and Detective McCabe who found the photos. Given that Adamsink's initials and numbering are on each of the photos, he's telling the truth here. And Rose is either mistaken or lying. I don't know which, and I don't know why. The 6th reason to doubt the backyard photos is that the 2 supposedly communist newspapers that Oswald was holding in his hands are actually contradictory to one another. The Militant was published by Trotskyites, people who were in favor of an international communist revolution. They didn't just want revolution in their own backyard. They wanted it to be worldwide. Whereas the other paper Oswald had, The Worker, was aligned with the Soviet Union. The ideology that was espoused in these 2 publications differed wildly. For anyone who was steeped in 1963 left-wing politics, it would look silly for Oswald to be holding up both the militant and the worker at the same time. Nevertheless, that's what these photos show. Reason number 7. There's the more out-on-a-limb argument that the photo itself is authentic, but it was taken of another person who is not actually Lee Harvey Oswald. The analysis here is really focused on the face of the person in the backyard photos as compared to known pictures of Lee Harvey Oswald. Now, everyone assumes that these are the same people because the photo looks very much like Oswald, and Oswald's wife Marina is on the record saying that she took the photo. I spent a while comparing the backyard photo face with other pictures of Oswald. The one thing that jumps out at me is that Oswald's chin seems to be quite a bit more pointed, whereas the chin in the backyard photo is more squared off. But then again, if we're to believe Captain Fritz's notes, even Oswald himself admitted that it was his face in the picture, although he said that someone superimposed his face. The 8th reason to pause before adopting the idea that the backyard photos are authentic is that there are 3 people who claim to have been shown one of these photos at the Dallas police station before they were discovered in Ruth Payne's garage on Saturday afternoon, the day after the assassination. Washington Evening Star reporter Jerry O'Leary confirmed to the FBI that he was shown one of these backyard photos at the Dallas police station either on the evening of the assassination or early the next morning. Michael Payne told the Warren Commission that on the night of the assassination, the police asked him where Oswald was standing when he was holding the rifle that was later on the cover of Life magazine. Payne said that he thought the picture was taken at Oswald's Neely Street house. He said that he could tell it was that house from the clapboard siding on the house in the picture. But according to Michael Payne's Warren Commission testimony, he went to this Neely Street duplex where the photo was taken only one time when he was picking up the Oswalds for dinner. As far as we know, he never went around to the backyard when he was there. So it's a little surprising that he was able to immediately identify the backyard where these photos were taken. And according to Michael Payne, that identification was on the night of the assassination before the backyard photos were found. Payne's testimony about being shown the photo on Friday night is supported by the notes of Captain Will Fritz. In those notes, Fritz describes asking Oswald on Saturday, late morning and early afternoon, about where he was living when the picture was made. Fritz said that Oswald was evasive about the location, but he also said, quote, "Mr. Payne told me about where Oswald lived on Neely Street. At first, I didn't think this was a big deal because we don't know the exact moment when the photos were discovered on Saturday afternoon. It's possible that they were discovered in time to bring them to the station so that they could be in Fritz's notes. But what Fritz actually says is that Michael Payne identified the house, and we know that Payne was at the police station on Friday night, not Saturday morning or afternoon. Together, the testimony of Jerry O'Leary, Michael Payne, and Captain Fritz shows that at least one of the backyard photos was at the police department before it was officially found, and I can't make that make sense. And finally, the 9th reason to have concerns about the backyard photo is the story of Roscoe White and the photograph known as 133 CDS. Roscoe White began working for the Dallas police on October 7, 1963, about 6 weeks before the assassination. White worked in the photographic department of the Dallas police. According to his widow, Geneva Dees, he was skilled in trick photography. She said that the photo that she turned over to the HSCA was obtained by Roscoe White during the course of his employment with the Dallas police. What makes the Roscoe White angle intriguing for a lot of people is that White served in the Marines and at Sugi, Japan at the same time as Oswald. Given that enlisted men would go to the same clubs, it's very possible, but not confirmed, that Roscoe White may have known Oswald in the Marines. Oh, and get this, White's wife, Geneva, worked at Jack Ruby's Carousel Club. Believe it or not, those facts are not disputed. But what is more contested is whether Roscoe White was one of the assassins of President Kennedy, which is what his widow and his son both believe. There's one more point that's relevant to Roscoe White as it pertains to these backyard photos. When he was in the military, White broke his right wrist, which resulted in a protrusion a couple of inches behind the wrist. Some researchers believe that this same protrusion appears on the arm of the man in the backyard photos. Personally, I can't tell. The picture just isn't clear enough for me to make it out one way or the other. Whether Roscoe White's body is pictured in the backyard photo or not, you have to admit that it's a little strange that the HSCA photo experts ended up reviewing a picture from a guy who served with Oswald in Atsugi, was an expert in trick photography and told his family that he was personally involved in the Kennedy assassination. Then again, maybe Roscoe White just made a copy of the photo for himself because he knew it would have historical value, and the Marine link to Oswald and Geneva's employment at the Carousel Club with Jack Ruby could just be coincidences. One final point. If it really is Oswald in the photo, it's possible that he was told to take this picture as part of his work setting up a legend of a serious communist who was potentially violent. I'm not saying that's what happened, just that it is a possibility to consider. In other words, even if the photo is completely legit, that doesn't necessarily mean that the story behind it is. Even after all of the information we've covered over the last few episodes, I still don't know for sure whether the backyard photos are real or fake. But here's what I do know. The negative that was tested was authentic, and it was taken by Commissioned Exhibit 750, the Imperial Reflex Camera. That's in evidence, but a photographic forgery is still possible. We can't rule out that someone took a picture of a composite picture using this Imperial Reflex camera. The circumstances surrounding the discovery of the Imperial Reflex and the substitution of that camera into the record in exchange for the stereo realist camera is suspicious. The timing of Marina staying at Robert Oswald's house in between changing her story about the cameras seems to suggest the possibility that they may have spoken about it. But why would Robert Oswald want to incriminate his own brother? If he's not telling the truth, then what's he doing? If he is telling the truth, then why did he hold on to the camera for so long without telling the FBI? There's not really hard proof here, just a lot of unanswered questions. The fact that 3 people saw the backyard photo before it was officially discovered at the Dallas Police Department, combined with the ghost photograph cutout of Oswald from 133C and Officer Brown's changing stories on why he cut the figure out, tends to show that there could have been forgery or some other shenanigans going on. I just don't know what it is exactly. Finally, the argument that cuts the strongest against Oswald to me is the handwriting match on the back of the de Mohrenschildt photo. If the HSCA handwriting expert is correct, and Oswald really did write the inscription to my friend George, then that seems to prove that it must be Oswald in the photo if he has his handwriting on the back. But the additional handwriting from 2 other unknown people who are not Marina and not George de Mohrenschildt makes that evidence even more confusing. My ultimate answer on the backyard photos is that while the single photo and the single negative tested by the HSCA were not doctored, we can't rule out that someone took a picture of a picture. The foreknowledge of the photos before they were officially discovered is my biggest problem with taking these photos seriously. Because of that, and all the other reasons that we mentioned in the last 2 episodes, whether Oswald's face was superimposed or not, the backyard photos should be viewed with healthy skepticism and an open mind.